gospel is simple. Get back to the basics. You got this crazy climate and something's going on in the world and your kids are asking you questions about it. Here's what you do. Engage your kids in critical thinking by asking them these 3 questions. What would Jesus do right now? What would Jesus say about this? How would Jesus respond? Isn't that simple? It's so simple. But the problem is that most parents don't know the answer to it.
Hey there, amazing parents. Welcome back to another episode of Pep Talk, the Parent Experience Podcast. My name is Kayla, and I'm joined with my co-host.
I'm Robert.
And we are so excited to be back with you for another month of another Pep Talk.
Yes, we're so glad that you guys are here. We release a new episode on the 15th of every month, so remember that. Look out for that when we drop it new every month on the 15th. And this is a new episode. So maybe it's the 15th when you're listening. Maybe it's not the 15th. We're still glad that you are here.
We are. So this month we are talking about wisdom at kids. And so wisdom is finding out what you should do and then doing it. And so the kids are going to be memorizing James 1:5. If any of you needs wisdom, you should ask God for it. He will give it to you. And so as we talk about wisdom, we will be looking at the life of Jesus and how Jesus grew in wisdom. And all these stories from the Bible about people asking God for wisdom because God is faithful to give it to us. So it's going to be a really great month.
I love that so much. And we had a guest speaker for family night, and that's who we're bringing on to the podcast. So we have an incredible conversation with Pastor Jeff Baker, the lead pastor here at New Life Church. Maybe you've heard his name before, maybe you haven't. It's still going to be a great conversation either way, as he's actually talking a lot about how we can talk to our kids about culture and different things come up in your parenting. Some things you feel equipped to handle, some things you don't feel equipped to handle. And one of the great things is he gives us 3 questions that we can ask as parents to help guide conversations with our kids so that they can live a life that is following Jesus and that can raise them to be kids to know and love God and follow him when they become adults as well. And so it's a great conversation, and we're just going to go ahead and dive right into that interview with Pastor Jeff.
All right, and so Pastor Jeff is here with us.
Man, it's so exciting to be with you guys.
Man, we love getting to hang out with you and learn from you. Well,
I love it. I love learning from you guys. Come on, it's mutual.
Yeah.
It's great to have you here, Pastor Jeff. We're glad you're in this podcast studio. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, this month we're talking about wisdom in kids ministry and knowing what you should do and then doing it, finding that out. It's like a big treasure hunt. So all month we're going to be talking about like the treasure hunt with kids. And I love because tonight we were really talking about finishing out this series on parenting with a purpose. And one of the challenges is, man, we're just raising kids in a crazy culture. Can you talk a little bit about like how culture has changed maybe from when you were a kid, Pastor Jeff, to now?
Oh, my word. You mean like when we actually went outside and played?
Hey, we play outside on our video games.
I think things have radically changed. When I was a kid, you would go to church on Sunday and no stores would be open. Your perspective would be that you would be at church. All your friends were going to be at church, different churches. Nobody was anti-Christian. You may not have been pro-Christian, but nobody was anti-Christian. The worst things that you dealt with were, well, you're preppy. Well, you're just, book smart. You're just an athlete. You're just a musician. Like those were the titles that people had to wrestle with, And so I just think that things have radically changed from the time that I raised my kids to the time that my kids are raising my grandchildren. And they haven't just slipped by like percentages. We're talking, seismic tectonic shifts that have happened where the things you have to talk to your children about today, when I was raising my kids, it never even entered my mind that I would have to talk to my children about the things that I know parents have to talk to their kids about right now. So I know that for me, pastor of New Life, I have compassion for parents that are raising kids. I'm ecstatic when I see parents that are wanting to raise their kids in this day and age to know and to love Jesus, because I'm just like, you are raising up missionaries. You are raising up warriors. You have no idea. I just don't think that parents understand the next generation they're raising up and that God's actually called them to do it. It wasn't that way back when I was a kid and when I was raising my kids, you know? Like, we just didn't have the same pressure. But there's a lot of pressure on families and there's a lot of pressure on Christianity. And it's causing the mission of mom and dad to become more important now, I think, than ever.
Yeah, there's so much significance, it feels like, in all the moments, which sometimes can feel like too much pressure, I think, for parents.
It can.
Yeah, where you're like, man, I know I got to help my kid know and love God, but I also got to make sure they are getting good grades, because then if I don't do this, then, you know, your brain can just spiral down in a whole thing. But, you know, here at New Life, our heart is to help encourage and equip parents because God's called them for this.
Right.
I love tonight you encourage parents by saying, like, God called you for such a time as this.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Like that the kids, it's not an accident that God gave you your kids and that you're right here listening to this podcast today, right? Like
Right.
God sees us and God knows you and God gave your kids to you. And so, so I think parents, be encouraged that God knows what's going on and he gave you your kids. And so we just want to join parents in their journey as you are raising these missionaries.
You are.
As they're facing culture in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think I would just want to add this. Look, everything in this world around us, just test me and see if this is true. Everything seems more complex now. Everything seems more fast-paced now. Everything seems like it's not just you have to do this one little thing. It's like you have to do these 10 little things. It just seems like it's ratcheted up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From technology to my schedule to the expectations put on me, whatever it is. And I just want to say this to parents that are wanting to raise Christ-centered children. Like, step back for a moment, take a breath. Because here's how you lead your children really to know who Christ is in a crazy, chaotic, fast-paced, complex world. Get back to the basics. Don't make Christianity complex. Make Christianity simple. The gospel is simple. Get back to the basics. And we talked about some of that even in our session tonight.
Yeah.
Right? So those who were there, they heard me say, hey, look, get back to the basics. Here's what you do. Here's how you do it. You got this crazy climate and something's going on in the world and your kids are asking you questions about it. Here's what you do. Engage your kids in critical thinking by asking them these 3 questions. Like, what would Jesus do right now? What would Jesus say about this? How would Jesus respond? Like, I think, isn't that simple?
Yeah.
It's so simple. But the problem is that most parents don't know the answer to it. So they're not asking their kids it.
Right. Yeah, and I think it can be intimidating then if you don't know. So if you don't know, where would you encourage a parent to start?
Well, that's what's interesting. See, I think that we get things backwards all the time. And we make things more complex than what they need to be. So I think parents are going to be like, well, man, holy cow, I gotta listen to 5 other podcasts about parenting. I gotta read 12 other books about parenting. I need to go to this, 3 parenting conferences. Or they just kind of put their head in the sand. They don't know what to do, right? And they're kind of by osmosis hoping that Pastor Michaela is going to teach their kids what they're supposed to do or something else, right? And so I just think that, look, instead of that, here's what you need to do. You need to get yourself back to the basics of who is Jesus. So instead of starting with how do I parent my kids, you first start with the foundation. If I know what Jesus would do in a moment like this, I can teach my kids. Yeah. If I know what Jesus would say, then I can teach my kids. So when the world's chaotic and the world's crazy and your kid's asking a question, the best thing for you to do would be, I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to go find out what Jesus would do, and then we're going to talk about it. Yeah. And then in that way, here's another thing. Let me say this. If you don't know what Jesus would do and you're a mom and dad, and you want to help your children lead their life in such a way that they would be asking those kind of critical thinking questions, then that's where you, Pastor Michaela, that's where you come in. That's where you, Pastor Robert, you come in. That's where I come in. That's where other Christian parents come in. You go to them and you ask them. No harm, no foul. But if you don't ask, then you're never going to lead your children the way that they should go, right? So what I'm encouraging is basically this. Get back to the basics. And the basics start with, do you know what Jesus would do? Do you know how Jesus would respond? Right? Do you have any clue at all? Because if you don't, you can't teach your kids. You go find that out, and now you can teach your kids in a crazy, chaotic, fast-paced, complex world, the simplicity of the gospel. Who is he? What would he say? What would he do? And if we can help our kids critically think in that way, then we're going to change their identity. They're going to see themselves different. They're going to be stronger in their faith, and they're going to be able to be a beacon of hope and light and encouragement in a world that's full of craziness.
Yeah, I just keep thinking, when you're talking about that, I just keep thinking of Romans 12:2 that says, don't conform to the pattern of the culture around you, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can test what God's will is.
Come on.
And I think,
That's
man,
good.
like, okay, God, you're going to keep renewing my mind as I am going back to your word and trying to figure out who you are. You're going to renew my mind. And then I'm going to be able to test whatever comes my way.
Yeah.
Right? And see what is God's will in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So that's really encouraging. And I think practical as our kids are starting school, like maybe write those 3 simple questions down somewhere, put it on your fridge just to remind you as situations are coming up. Like,
Yeah.
okay, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? How would Jesus respond?
You got it. That's it. That's it. Go get back to the simple. Get your own heart back to the simple.
Yeah.
Just get it back there. You push back on the complexity and chaos and fast pace. Push back on that. Get yourself back to the basics. Don't get overwhelmed. You know, the Bible is a big book. There's a lot going on there. I'm not saying you got to know all the details. Just get back to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Who is Jesus? What did he say? What did he do? Teach your kids that. You do that as a parent, you're going to win.
Yeah.
Hands down. Doesn't matter who the other team is, you win every time.
I love that, Pastor Jeff. So let's make it practical. Let's make it applicable. Let's make it simple, like you're saying. What does it look like really to take these questions for a parent? What does it actually look like to have these conversations with their kid? Can you help us just process a little bit of what it might look like, or a situation that might come up where a parent has an opportunity to bring up these questions and really help their kids have maybe a biblical view?
Well, I mean, here's the truth is that your kids are going to bring them to you. Your kids are going to come home from school in the first month, and they're going to say something about, my friend, whatever her name is, just pick a name, Lisa. My friend Lisa says that, she's got a girlfriend in school, and it's so why are they doing that? Right? Or unfortunately, my teacher said this, but that's different than what Pastor Michaela said. Like, these things are going to come to you.
Right.
You don't have to go look for them. They're coming to you, and they're coming your way, right? And they're coming on the next TV show that you're watching. I mean, they're right there. Like, you're watching a TV show, and all of a sudden your kid asks a question. You're watching a movie, your kid asks a question, right? You're watching the news, and your kid walks by, and your kid asks a question. Like, they're coming to you. So the first thing that you got to do is you got to make sure that, A, you're not responding out of fear. Not out of fear. That's number one. Okay. Number two, it would be to restate the question and then to ask them before you give them an answer, what do you think? Get them engaged in conversation. Then you can go to, well, that's interesting. Like, so your friend has another girl in the school that she's calling her girlfriend. How does that make you feel? Now you got them engaged. Then you can go to, so let's just say, what do you think? What do you think? Like, let's say I'm talking to my daughter, Tiffany. Tiffany, how do you think Jesus wants you to respond to them? How do you think Jesus wants you to love them? What do you think Jesus wants to do? Because maybe Tiffany's going, yeah, and some of my other friends are they're laughing at them and they're calling them names and they're doing, right? Or no one's calling this a problem. Why isn't this a problem? Depends on the personality of your kid, right?
Right.
But then to like, so how do you feel about this? Like, how would you respond to this? Okay, now let's go deeper. What would Jesus do? How would Jesus love them? How do you think that Jesus wants you to act towards them during this school year? I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, engage them. I think we either A, we don't know what to do. We try to avoid things as parents. They're difficult topics. They're deep topics. But I just think it's simple. Engage them in some conversation. Ask the questions of what would Jesus do? And then reinforce. Lastly, reinforce. Anything that your kid says that is biblically accurate, reinforce it. That's right.
Yeah.
Way to go. Man, I'm so proud of you that you even said that, wow, the Bible said that Jesus even had sinners that were around him and he loved them, right? He loved them right where they were at, but whenever he had an opportunity, he spoke truth to them. He didn't condemn them, right? Like, you just reinforce it. And then at the end, mom and dad gets to come back and go, so let me explain it. And they the mom and dad puts like the bookends on the conversation. That's what I see. Now, look, I just said a number of things. So Michaela, like, what did you hear me say about that in, a particular, maybe of an order or a thought process or an idea? And what additional thoughts would you add to it?
Yeah. So the big thing I think is, I love you said right at the beginning of that, is you're parenting out of a place of empowerment. You're trying to empower your child to really own their faith.
Good.
And not leading out of fear. And like, I'm afraid of this topic, or I'm afraid I don't know the truth. And so you started by asking questions as a parent.
Yep.
I think that that's an important thing, because it helps your child to feel heard. It doesn't feel like you're just programming your child. Instead, you're engaging their brain, creating that critical thinking.
Yes.
There's no lack of knowledge in the world right now.
Right.
But there can be lack of discernment. And so as parents, we got to facilitate this discernment and this critical thinking in our children. And so I think the style of conversation that you just role played out for us was that, like, hey, I'm going to help engage my kids' feelings.
Yep.
I'm going to engage their knowledge.
Yep.
What do you know about this? Maybe you don't have to fully dive into a topic yet.
Yeah, maybe.
You just got to find out where they're at. Like, what do you think about this? How did that make you feel? Okay. How do you think Jesus would respond about that? And I love that you just bring it back to faith without making it feel like a churchy thing. Like, what do you think your pastor would say? I love, like, what do you think Jesus would do? And I think in that, you're going to create a disciple of Jesus, which really just means someone that's going to be growing in love like Jesus was. Jesus just radically loved people. Yeah. And if our kids can grow up knowing the truth, knowing the truth and radically loving people, like, man, the church is going to be set up great.
It's going to be set up great. Yeah. So again, all those things you said, spot on. And thank you for adding all those things to it. You did great with that. I just want to make sure that for parents, they know, like, remember, like, one of the greatest things in that whole conversation is, like, discerning, is this even something I need to dive into right now? Because maybe when they give that answer back, like, well, what do you think? And they're just like so naive. It's like, well, I'm not gonna open that can of worms right now.
Right.
And then what does Jesus say? How would Jesus respond? But then reinforcing, celebrating what they say. I mean, doesn't it feel good when you say something and someone else agrees with you?
Yeah.
Doesn't it feel good when you say something and someone else goes, that's awesome? With our kids, soak that up. Yeah. They soak it up. So let's make sure we celebrate, when they say things that are biblically accurate. Let's like encourage that. And then at the end, make sure you summarize it. Make sure you're the leader. Yeah. So don't flip this. Some people, they start asking questions and they stop being the leader. You're still the leader. Your kids need you to land the plane. They need you to land the conversation. They need you to, be able to say, you're right. And here's how I know you're right. Because here's what Jesus has said. Here's what Jesus would do. Right. That's why, again, jumping back in the podcast, that's why it's so important that you are diving into who is he and what's he doing and how would he respond in this crazy world that I live in, so that you can teach your kids that.
Oh, so good.
That's great. Well, our podcast is called Pep Talk.
Yes, sir.
And so to wrap up this interview, would you just take a moment to talk to the parent who's listening today and just send them out into their day, into their week, into the rest of this month with a pep talk of encouragement as they are raising kids to know and love God?
Yeah. Well, number one, my name's Jeff Baker. I'm your friendly, chubby pastor, and I love you. I love you. And I want you to know that we're in your corner. You're not alone. To any mom and dad who's listening to this, you're not alone. You were never meant to do this alone. That's why we're here. We are doing something radically different at New Life. We're not asking you to bring your kids to us so that we can make them amazing disciples. We're asking for us to be in your corner so that we can help you, mom and dad, help your children to become radical followers of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So we are in your corner. I think we're proving that with what we're doing with family nights, the way we've got Sundays set up. I mean, the whole works, the whole gamut. So you are not alone, mom and dad, in this crazy world. We know it is, right? We don't have our heads buried in the sand. We're right there with you. And when you struggle and when you're going through difficult things, we're here for you. Please use us, connect with us. But greater than all of those things, mom and dad, don't forget that the Holy Spirit of God lives in you. And he can do greater things than you ever could. And if you want wisdom like we're talking about, would you do what King Solomon did? And he asked God, give me wisdom beyond my years. And I just want to encourage mom and dads. God's got everything you need to lead your children. We're part of that solution, but the Holy Spirit in you is the greatest resource you have. Ask God for wisdom and he'll give it to you and it will surprise you. Out of your mouth will come words that you didn't even know were there. Out of your head will come ideas in parenting that you didn't even know were there, right? Out of your actions will come more Christ-centered responses than you've ever seen in your life. Ask him. He'll empower you. He'll help you. We're here in your corner to champion you and help you accomplish all of it.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Pastor Jeff. We loved our time with you today.
Thanks so much.
Me too.
Well, what a great conversation with Pastor Jeff. I'm encouraged walking away from it, and I hope that you are too. Just remember to ask in situations that come up with our kids, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? And how would Jesus respond to this? Keep it simple, to the basics. And so I'm encouraged in whatever you face as you're headed about your days this month. I hope that you guys will remember these things and just remember that God has equipped you for such a time as this.
Yeah, if you found this episode helpful, remember, if you're not subscribed, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Parent Experience. And also, you can share it with a friend. That's the best way to get the word out so that more people can experience the pep talks that we send out every month on the 15th of every month. But until our next episode, just remember this. You guys are doing an incredible job. Keep raising amazing kids to know and love God, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right.